Better Preach, Episode 94, Confronting a Giant Gap in the Church with Kristin Bird. Welcome to Better Preach, a podcast for Catholic leaders on developing and delivering great Catholic talks. I'm your host, Ryan O'Hara, a Catholic speaker who specializes in parish missions and parish retreats. And I'm so excited to join you on your journey of communicating the true, the good, and the beautiful. Every once in a while, you come across a new perspective, fresh eyes, if you will, on an age-old challenge. And it breaks right through all the baggage and preconceived notions about that challenge. And this podcast, in kind of a grand sense, is about addressing the age-old challenge of reaching everyday Catholics in the pews with the gospel. Kristin Bird, my guest today on the show, helped me see this perennial challenge with fresh eyes. And she conceives of this challenge and talks about it in a way that is so helpful and so accessible. You're going to love this episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. Kristin Bird is a wife, mother, disciple of Jesus, and an on-fire Catholic. She serves as the executive director of Burning Hearts Disciples and is a popular speaker and consultant with a long history of helping Catholic parishes and schools facilitate deeper discipleship and conversion. Kristin and her husband, Tony, live in Oshkosh, Wisconsin with their 3 teenage children. And when she gets out from behind the computer screen, you can usually find her quoting movies with her husband, laughing at bad puns with her children, or with her nose in a book. But before we start, please be sure to stop by and say hi on Instagram at Better Preach. And also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. Please reach out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify by leaving a rating and a written review. Let's get into it. Kristin Bird, welcome to the Better Preach podcast. I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here.
So you've been serving in ministry for many years, and in many recent years, serving as a leader and now the executive director of an apostolate from Oshkosh, Wisconsin there, Burning Hearts Disciples. Mm-hmm. And you're serving the church in a variety of ways and really helping it kind of reach its potential, that the church exists to evangelize. And you're helping to equip that reality in the church and in the world. And I want to hear, as you go out and as you speak with people and as you lead in different environments, I'm sure you see a lot of different things. But I wonder about the pain that you so most often feel like you're addressing in the church today. What kind of pain or challenge or difficulty are you encountering in the situations where you're leading and speaking and equipping?
Yeah, so I think sometimes it depends on the audience. So we do work with both leaders and then with parishioners, for lack of a better word, but in the pew Catholics. And I would say, though, if I look at it cohesively or like overarching the whole thing, the biggest pain that I see right now is a gap. There's a disconnect. And that disconnect is between who the church says we are, who she calls us to be, who the church is herself, who Jesus is, and kind of the experience of everyday Catholics. That those two things, there's just a huge gap, a huge disconnect between those two things. And I think that really is the source of the pain. So there are lots of ways that shows up and lots of symptoms of that we see kind of out. But when we take that as an organization, even back to our own prayer and reflection, it's to say there's this big gap between kind of that full understanding of who we are as the people of God, as Christians, as sons and daughters of the Father, as co-heirs, with Jesus, and who we understand ourselves to be, who we've experienced ourselves to be in the context of people who go to church on Sunday.
That's fascinating. And boy, that resonates with me too. What do they see themselves to be? Like, do you think that gap is experienced universally, but just different by degree? Or what is the experience of that gap say for clergy, and what does that gap say for the people in the pews?
Yeah. So I think for the people in the pew, I'll start there. The gap that I see is this sense of I am someone who goes to church, and I like going to church, and I care about my faith. And again,
Yeah,
these are right. These are generalizations. So there are
of
definitely
course.
specific people who would not fit this particular mold. But generally speaking, I go to church. I care about my faith as an idea. I'm kind of doing this because it's what I've always done. It's how I was raised. I think there's something good in it. I think there's something valuable in this ethical, moral life that it helps me to lead. And I think there's something after death that hopefully this kind of helps me get there in a positive way, whatever that looks like. But it just
Yeah.
seems so much more nebulous than, as concrete and relational and personal as the church actually teaches that to be. But that's not really their experience of it. So that's the disconnect, right, with the person in the pew, I think. Um, and then some of the disconnect between those who are either in like professional lay ministry and sometimes and clergy in some cases, there's very much a disconnect in understanding that that's where the people in the pew are. Now, some of them
Mm,
might also fall into that
mhm.
same understanding, but those folks in ministry that we run across, that we work with, who absolutely are on fire, and they're disciples of Jesus, and they love him, and they do this out of love for him, they have a hard time sometimes, I think, relating with the folks in the pew because they're in such a different place. Naturally, they are, right? Because that's part of probably why they got called into ministry to begin with, in some way, shape, or form. And so there's a secondary gap there between the folks who really are growing and on this discipleship journey and understand it to be that in some way, shape, or form, and then the folks they're trying to serve. So I think about a parish that we were working with, and the staff wanted to do an Advent calendar, like an online Advent calendar. Every day you could go and
Mhm.
open the door, and there was a new activity to do, which is a great idea, right? There's lots of
For
potential
sure.
in that idea. And 4 of the days were the activity to do was Lectio Divina with one of the Eucharistic prayers. Okay,
Whoa.
not a bad idea, right? And potentially a very fruitful form of prayer for the right person. But
Mhm.
for the
Right.
average person in the
Right.
pew, oh my goodness. Like, first of all, those Eucharistic prayers, some of them are very long. And second of all, do they even know what Lectio
Minutes.
Divina is? So,
Right.
uh,
And to do
yeah,
that with a Eucharistic prayer,
right. Yeah,
Um, oh my
exactly.
gosh. Yes.
So it was like, oh
Maybe
my
one of the
gosh.
gospels that we're familiar with.
Right, but there's just so there was like that huge gap, and you can see it in the staff who came up with this idea, and they were so excited about it. It was something that reached
Yeah.
them where they were on their journey.
I wonder, as you reflect on this disconnect. So in some ways, it's kind of like the leaders are saying one thing, the people who are hearing those messages are experiencing another thing. It's not that they don't desire what's being proposed, but it's not put to them in such a way that helps them go from wherever they are to that new place.
Right.
And everyone just kind of ends up frustrated. The
Hmm.
leaders, I'm guessing, as you're describing,
Yes,
kind of like, why isn't this working? And the people in the pew saying, what are they talking about?
that's exactly
This,
right.
that's not real life.
Hmm.
I remember hearing Ralph Martin 25 years ago. Ralph Martin and Sister Ann Shields preach on the mission of the Redeemer, an encyclical from John Paul II.
Hmm.
And I remember listening to what they were talking about, the Pope's words, and they were so powerful. They were so inspiring. And I thought, wait a minute, you mean the Pope wrote all that? Why? I don't experience any of that. Like, is this a secret? Are you trying to keep, no, it's just like, that's like this ultimate experience of these words from our leader, this apostle of Jesus Christ. But my lived everyday experience looking around is like nothing like that. And so I experience that pain too. So what's your
Hmm.
theory of the case to address this grand gap that you see?
Our ministry, and this came out of even some of my own personal reflection, and we borrowed for sure the words of Pope Francis, is that the response to this gap is accompaniment. And we mean that in the fullest sense of
Mm,
the word. And of course, it has become a buzzword, like all those things do in the church, to mean all kinds of different things.
sure.
But genuinely to understand what it means to walk with someone on their journey, not necessarily in front of them.
Mm,
And if you are, maybe a step ahead, right? And not behind them, but to draw near to them. I mean, that's where our ministry got its name from, right? Burning Hearts Disciples. It comes from
sure.
the story of the road to
Yeah.
Emmaus. And how does Jesus accompany these people? And in this particular case, right, it is two disciples who had been catechized by Jesus, right? They had been
Hmm.
his followers. They had
Hmm.
heard everything he had to say. And kind of when the rubber met the road, they were like, meh, no, I'm going to go back to my old way of life. And so what does Jesus do to reach out to them? How does he walk with them? And that's really where our ministry came out of. And to say that, I think that that's the response, because obviously there was that gap, similar gap for those two disciples. How could they, right?
Mm,
As someone now today, I look at, how could you have spent all of this time with Jesus himself, listening to what he had to
that's right.
say, right? Like experiencing the miracles firsthand, not even just the way, we maybe initially experienced them reading scripture stories about them, right? But actually to have seen this
Sure.
firsthand and then to be willing to leave it all behind. Jesus's response to them, the very first thing it says is he drew near to them. He drew near to them. And the big thing that was an eye-opener for me as I started seeing this gap in ministry and in the work we were doing and I was doing in the church, it was he walked with them in the wrong direction. Not to keep them going in the
Mm,
wrong direction. He didn't want them to stay in Emmaus, right? But even though they were
mm,
going the wrong way, by the way, he had literally told them not to go. He said to them, stay in Jerusalem. And they left. And he draws near to them, listens to them, teaches them, and walks with them in that direction in order to show them something greater, in order to bring them into a deeper relationship,
wow.
to build that trust with him that then sends them back after he again is gone from their sight. But this time they go back, right? And they have a completely different response to that experience. And so that is the core of what can help meet that gap, is for us, all of us. And when I say us, I mean every baptized person, right? That for us to draw near to folks that we see who have not had the same experience that we have had. And not to judge them for it, not to criticize them for it, but to draw near to them and say, tell me about the experience you have had, and to listen to where they're
Mm,
coming from, to what it is that they're, the pain that's on their heart or the deep desire that they have. And not because I can respond to that, but because I can then introduce you to the person who met the desires of my heart, who continues to heal the pains in my heart. That's what I want to do, right? Is introduce them
mm,
to him so that he can do that for them. And that, I think, it will go a long way to bridging that gap. Because what I've found is that folks who are catechized, they've been going to mass for their entire lives. They're maybe gone to Catholic schools or to religious ed or whatever the case might be. When they
yep.
are lit on fire, right? That fire burning in their hearts, all of that knowledge comes to life for them. It's like they leap ahead, right? Instead of the way that the
Mhm.
disciples made
Mhm.
disciples in the early church, where it was like, okay, encounter Jesus, and now we're going to teach you everything that means. If people have learned everything that means, or a lot of what that means, and then they encounter Jesus, it's like supercharged now, because everything that they've learned over all these years starts coming to life for them and has impact and meaning and effect.
But there's this grand disconnect that just seems to persist at times. So what is the church doing if they don't experience accompaniment? What are they experiencing
So I
generally?
think, yeah, so I think generally they're experiencing mass in varieties of
Hmm.
ways and done to varieties of degrees of right truth, beauty, goodness, and oneness. So like lots of different ways that
Yeah,
gets
yeah,
expressed. For
yep,
and in fact, I would say for most Catholics, that is their only experience of the church, is what happens at mass.
sure.
And mass is not accompaniment, right? That's not what it is. Mass is intended to be a response to this worship of God and
Right.
individual and communal worship of this God whom we love and whom we adore and all of those things. And that certainly is not the experience. And so what the church has done is practically speaking, okay, the only time we have people coming is on Sunday morning, which means we have to try to get everything done at Mass. So everything we do at Mass has to try to meet all the needs of every single person who walks through our door. And that's just not, first of all, it's not the role of Mass. And second of all, it's not possible. It's not possible for Mass as a ritual, right, to reach into the now. Jesus, through the Mass, can and does on certain circumstances. So you'll hear stories of people who had a massive encounter and conversion experience at Mass. And that's beautiful and wonderful because he will work and the Holy Spirit will move. But we're missing so much more. So then the other things that happen is, okay, so we'll try to do a Bible study, right? Which is great, but it gets the same 10 to 30 people who come to everything at the parish, right? And there's no sense of mission out of that Bible study. So, okay, if we're going to run a Bible study, who's coming to that Bible study? Who is it intended for? Where are they on their faith journey? What's the next best step for them? And how will they take that step, or how will we help them take that step coming out of this Bible study? And you can substitute Bible study for any program that we run. The thing that I think we do is we presume that people who come have a relationship with Jesus already. We presume that they have been evangelized and are disciples. And so the things that we offer are things to help them flesh out, what does it look like to live this Christian life? And that's really what, right, faith formation does, whether it's adult faith formation or for children and youth. It's okay, right? Here's the catechism. And let's break that down and break that open and help make it palatable and understandable to these people. But there's like a step we've missed because we're presenting this entire code of life that is a code of life that we live because we love Jesus, right? I mean, that's why we live the way we live. I have 3 teenagers, right? And so they go to public school. So we talk a lot about the things they see and the people they encounter at public school. And particularly when they were a little bit younger and starting to wrestle with some things earlier, maybe than I would have wanted them to have to in their friends' lives or things that they were seeing, they would say like, why they shouldn't do that. That's not right. Right. And they would be tempted to judge, I think. And my husband and I spent a lot of time, praying and reflecting and trying to figure out how to respond. And the best response that we ended up coming up with was, look, we live the way we live because we love Jesus. And we are willing to do things that are hard, things we don't like to do, things sometimes we even disagree with for people we love. We do that every day in the context of our family, right? I hate to make the bed. I absolutely hate it. My husband likes a made bed. And so sometimes, certainly not all the time, right? So every once in a while, I will make the bed just because I love my husband. I'll do things for people I love just because I love them. Well, if these people that we encounter out in the world don't love Jesus, why would they live that way? Right? Any more than why would you, Ryan, make the bed just because my husband says you should? Well, you wouldn't because you don't know him. You don't care about him. You don't love him, right? Like, but I do because I do have that relationship. And so it's that sense of, right, all of these teachings, these beautiful, wonderful teachings are supposed to come out of this lived experience of a relationship with a person that we love and who loves us. And so if we don't have that, then is it any wonder that people look at the church and say, oh, it's just a series of rules that have no application to my life?
How do we, in a sense, to keep the analogy going, kind of bridge this gap for some? So talk to me about how the average person in the pew experiences this bridging of this gap in going from kind of a spectator to this spiritual stuff to somebody who is a disciple and has decided to follow Jesus, and now there's a relationship. And then where does accompaniment fit into all of that?
So I think that not to give the like cliche answer, but yes, it fits in all those places, and it can fit in all those places. So part of what I love about the ministry and the work that we do, and part of what makes it super challenging, is that to say that we're based on this idea of accompaniment means we don't have anything canned. There's nothing out of the box. When parishes or schools come to us, or clergy comes to us, or leaders come to us and say, how can you help us? The first question is, I don't know. What do you need? Not, here's what we have, right? Because That's what makes it challenging. But I think for each of us, when we look at how do we help someone in the pew, it's to say, what do they need? There's not one answer to this question. And it all starts with us being willing to build that human relationship with them first, right? To get the answers.
What I'm hearing is you believe so much in accompaniment, and that's exactly how you will address the needs in front of you.
Yeah.
It's an accompaniment process for those that you're serving.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, draw near, talk to me, let me know what's going on. Then we can invite you into some solutions that may make sense for you because you're built on this principle of accompaniment versus I have the solution for you. I know what your problems are, and here's what we're going to do about it, which seems so often the case. It's beautiful. I actually, it wouldn't have surprised me had you said we have some solutions. And I said, sure. Oh yeah, all apostolates do. But your solution works within those same principles that you hope that the church will lead by as well.
Yeah, we try to, right? And so sometimes that's not the case. And sometimes it's like, well, I don't know what topics can you give? Okay, well, here's what we could do. Or we have a thing that we do that we just call like accompaniment formation, right? And it's like, here are the topics that we think someone needs to know about in order to be able to do the work of accompaniment in their daily life. And so we can do that. But really, the most fruitful work we do is when it's, okay, like you said, living out that, tell me about you. Tell me about what you need. Tell me about who you are. Tell me who you're trying to serve, right? Tell me what the pain, like the question you asked as we started, what's the pain you experience the most? Now, often I think that the pain folks are experiencing is a symptom. And usually, I told you what I think the deeper problem is underneath that symptom, but we still need to address the symptoms that meet their needs where they are.
So if you're speaking to, say, a group of lay leaders, ministry professionals, and volunteers, what are you recommending that people begin to do differently? And what does that accompaniment formation, as you mentioned, look like for those who are ready to dive into this more?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that we start by trying to make no assumptions. Right. I don't want to fall into the same trap that I feel like the church has fallen into. So I am not going to assume that anyone, whether they're a leader or a volunteer or even a clergy member, has been evangelized and has this relationship, a love relationship with Jesus. And one of the beautiful things about that is that what we've unpacked is that a lot of those folks would say they have that relationship with the church as an institution, but haven't always made the leap to the person of Jesus on a more personal level. So which is an easy bridge. That is an easy bridge for us to help gap, right? When that's the case. So first thing is we make no assumptions. So one of the first things that we always start off with is a proclamation of the kerygma with an invitation to respond. Right? So here it is. Here's the core gospel message. And how that plays out looks a little different depending on who's giving that, how long we have, right? All those pieces. But it's kind of like, look, if we're going to start all at the same place, which is, this is the core message of the gospel. This is the invitation that Jesus has put before each one of us. And here's an opportunity for you to respond to that invitation. And the beautiful thing about that is even people who have already responded to that invitation, and you and I know this, right? Every time it's reproposed to us, there's a new invitation to go a little deeper. So it's not, we're never dumbing it down for folks, right? There's always something new in that for us. And so we usually start with that. And then after that, we talk about that explicitly. Here's what we did, and here's why we did it. And here's why this is so important, this core proclamation. Then sometimes we'll talk about all the different ways you can do that, depending on your particular gifts, different resources and tools that exists to help you do that, all of that. But that's usually where we start.
What I'm hearing is your accompaniment begins with a proclamation and an invitation to close that gap and to kind of move from, you said, you may even have mostly a relationship with the church, let's say. I think that's a powerful idea. That is where many people are. It's a great way to imagine it, to a personal relationship with Jesus that involves this surrender and turning away from sin and turning towards God and surrendering our lives and beginning to follow him. What follows after that in this accompaniment formation?
Mm-hmm. So usually what we'll do is, if we can, we'll offer at that time or as a part of that experience, the sacrament of confession, because we'll talk about, right, how important that is, especially if it is a pattern of sin in particular that you're responding to, if that was the invitation. And so we'll offer that as a option, or try to encourage folks to participate in that if they're able to. And then, like I said, we talk about what we've just done, and we talk about why it's so important and why that core proclamation matters. And then we provide them, here's the framework that we used to do this. There's lots of different possible ways of proclaiming the kerygma, right? But it will literally give them, here are the 5 movements that we used as a part of that, and kind of spell it out for them to really help them see that, like, here's what we've done.
This is fascinating to me. You're not just doing the thing, you're talking with them about what they've experienced. I think that's missing. I think that's beautiful. I don't think I've ever thought about how important it needs to be in our context to help explain and accompany people through what they just experienced. That's a powerful conviction. How did you arrive at that? I don't know why it's not intuitive to me to think about the need for that, but it seems intuitive to what you're describing. Say more about how you arrived at that conclusion.
Sure. So I started in ministry as a youth minister, right? And I was doing RE and faith formation and youth ministry for high schoolers, and did a lot of that. And there wasn't a time, a day, a retreat, I don't even remember exactly where we were, where the activity that they were being asked to do, the teenagers, was like, if you could sum up the gospel message in 2 sentences, 3 sentences, whatever, however long, like, what would it be? And as the groups were sharing, it was kind of this realization for me of, oh my gosh, they have no idea. They have no idea. And this is what we've been doing, like, all year, for example, right? This is what we've been doing, is trying to unpack. I think it was the curriculum was focused on the Paschal mystery. Like, literally, this is what we've been trying to do for them. And so how are we at this point now where they can't kind of sum it up? And so then I went back and with my team and we started reflecting on, and the question was, when was the first time that you can identify that someone proclaimed the gospel to you? And most of my team couldn't identify a time. I could, and it was in high school. I went to a Catholic high school. I had a Lutheran teacher for music theory senior year that I took because it was a blow-off class. Like, I had no interest in it, but it was like, okay, easy class. And I liked the guy who was teaching it. He was a good teacher. Wow. And he was a Lutheran. He drew, and I know now I can say, I don't even know if he knew this, right? But essentially, he drew the bridge diagram from St. Catherine of Siena's dialogues and explained it to us. And on the chalkboard, he drew it out and was like doing the whole thing. And I'm like, and I vividly remembered that. And so the next time that we went back with the teens, that's what I did. Like, pulled from what this teacher had done for me in high school and was like, I'm going to do this. And then I said to him, like, this is the core gospel message. Everything else that you all talked about are all good and wonderful, important things that are a part of our faith. But, and this is really the key for me, and I've continued to be convicted by this as I see it, but all the rest of those things can be done and are done by people who don't have relationship with Jesus. There are people who don't have relationship with Jesus, who pray, who do good works, who care for the poor, who are good people, who are like moral and ethical and have all kinds of integrity, right? And it was like, so what makes us different? What makes us different? What sets us apart? Well, it has to be this relationship with Jesus, which is what is at the core of that proclamation. And so it was kind of that experience that made me go, oh my gosh, we're missing it, because we tried to teach these kids this for weeks, and they didn't get it until we said to them, this is what we're doing.
What a profound insight. I love this. And my mind is going to be blown for a while now. It does sort of beg the question, and we're on the Better Preach podcast. So preaching plays a pivotal role in what you're doing. What role do you think preaching plays, and how could the renewal of preaching move things forward in the church today?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that when we talk about the fact that, the reason that we try to fit everything into mass is because it's the time when people are there is true, right? Even if that's not what's the ideal or what it should be, that's what's happening. That's the reality. And so I think then preaching, particularly in the context of mass, right, has an incredibly important role to play in helping to bridge that gap for people. So I think about some of the preachers that I have known who do an amazing job at taking the readings and then saying, how can I turn these readings into a proclamation of the kerygma? And how can I invite people to respond in the context of this mass? So I know one priest friend of mine, every time he ends his homily, he talks about whatever invitation it was that Jesus put on your heart, that the Holy Spirit inspired or stirred up in you today. He says, when we get to the Eucharistic prayer and I say, lift up your hearts, and you say, we lift them up to the Lord. He said, I am going to pause. And that is the moment I want you to literally lift up this part of your heart, this responsive invitation, whatever it is, right, to the Lord. And then he does. And at that part of Mass, he pauses before he goes on to the rest of that prayer. It's so simple, right? And so small. But it makes that connection so much more explicit and something that folks can actually experience. It doesn't have to be that every time, but I think that the more we can recognize and get to know where people that we're preaching to, whether that's, a pastor and the people in his parish that are coming to Mass, or, those of us who preach in other contexts. When I was a youth minister and I was offering a teaching for the teenagers, it was, do I know them and where they are? And so how can I really, offer something that will be consistent with their experience? And then the other piece is, I think we need to do a better job just in general of not setting ourselves up as saints too early. So I have found that my preaching is much more fruitful when I am at least as often, if not more often, talking about the times I got it wrong than I am the times I got it right. Because if all I do is talk about what an amazing mom I am and how my kids are so amazing, and I think my kids are amazing, right? But we're certainly not a perfect family. Yeah. But if all I do is share the stories of God's grace moments that are, make me feel good inside, it sets up an unrealistic expectation for people. And they go, well, that's great for her, but she's super holy and churchy, and that's never going to be me. Whereas if I share more of the moments where, I missed the mark here, and here's what I learned from it, which is just as valid, right? It makes it more relatable for folks.
We've often used in this podcast the word vulnerability. Mm-hmm. There's nothing vulnerable about me sharing my successes. Nope. You know what I mean? Really. Yep. Whereas vulnerability, and I don't know if this has often been talked about, but vulnerability necessarily means you're giving access to a something painful, something perhaps embarrassing, something perhaps that you're not going to proclaim on social media or whatever. I think what I'm pointing out here, or just observing, is that's hard to do. That's hard to do well, where it doesn't become kind of this pity party and look at me, and it also shares something real, and God is kind of the one who gets the glory. That's really tough to do.
It is, but I think that it's helpful to think about it in terms of, again, like not to beat the horse, but think about in terms of the kerygma, right? So if I share the ways that I have been broken, that Jesus has healed, I'm not sharing my brokenness. I'm sharing his healing, right?
Yep.
But there's still vulnerability in that because I have to admit that I have been broken. And so I tell folks all the time, right? You don't necessarily need to share with folks that you're trying to accompany the places you're still bleeding from. You need a spiritual mentor, a spiritual director, a pastor, right? Someone else to share those with who can help you pray through those and help you invite Jesus into them. But you should absolutely be sharing the places that he's already brought healing. I mean, one of the saints says that that's why Jesus retains the wounds of the crucifixion after he's resurrected, right? Because he shines most strongly out of the places where he's brought healing. It doesn't negate them. It doesn't remove those wounds. It actually makes them places of his grace and mercy where they flow out to the rest of the world. So that when I think about it in that context, it helps me stay a little more humble about it, right? Like, this is not anything I did. This is
Yeah.
the things he's done in me.
That's
And then
right.
it also helps me focus on Jesus is the protagonist of the story.
That's
I'm
right.
not, right?
That's right. I want to ask about your dreams for the future church. What would it look like for you for this vision of accompaniment vis-a-vis the gospel and charisma? What would it look like if it unfolded more and more in the church? What's a bit of your dream?
Yeah, so a part of my dream is wrapped up in stories of the early church, and kind of how they were able to bring it about conversion in their communities. And so, one of the stories I've always loved is the one of how they, the Christians would go and rescue the babies right outside the
Mm,
walls that were being
mhm,
like completely abandoned and rejected. And so, for me, when I think about that, I think about a local parish, for example, would be a place where the people who are coming there are coming to be fed and nourished and with community and with folks who are like-minded, to be strengthened to go out of the walls of their parish, and they are living lives of radical charity. I mean, and
mm,
I genuinely mean radical charity, radical hospitality, like all of those senses. And to the point that people will ask them, why would you do that? And that every person in that parish can give an answer to that question that is their own spin, their own like flavor, right, of that proclamation of the gospel. And say, like,
mm.
he wants this for you too. And so would you be interested? Or what do you want him to do for you? This is what he did for me. However that looks, right? But that's what a parish could be, because that's a parish that's going to transform, not itself. It's not about mass attendance numbers. It's not about giving. It's not, right. Like, that would all happen naturally as a part of this, but it's about the impact that that parish is going to have on that community in which it's situated. And it would be uniquely positioned to meet the most immediate needs, and then be able to say, here's why we meet those needs for you.
Well, we have some work to do. God's doing God's doing so
He
much good
is,
work.
that's right.
I I love being Catholic. It's such a great time to be alive, to be Catholic, and to have a mission in the world. And you're an incredible example of that, and Burning Hearts Disciples and what it's doing. And so grateful for this conversation. I'm just so grateful for that new perspective, a new context that I hadn't fully thought about. And and I hope those who are listening are really challenged by this in what you're presenting today. Kristin, where could people connect with you or Burning Hearts Disciples online?
Yeah, so we have a website. It's burningheartsdisciples.org. So both of those are plural, hearts and disciples, right? burningheartsdisciples.org. And then we are also on social media. So you can message us through any of those outlets. There's a contact form on our website if you're interested in getting in touch with me. That would be fantastic. And we're always happy to just even start by having conversations with folks, even if it doesn't go anywhere, right? That's part of the ministry that we do, is saying, hey, what do you need? How could we pray with you today? And is there any insight that we can offer, or people we can connect you with who are trying to do the same things that you're doing? So
Awesome. Well, I hope folks will check that out, call you up, send you an email to hear more, to learn more. Again, Kristin, thanks so much for being a part of the podcast today. It's really great to have you on.
thanks so much for having me, and thanks for hosting these conversations. It's always so life-giving to talk with other folks who are, coworkers in the vineyard, but also have this same heart for mission. So thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate it.
I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show. Please do leave a rating and written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. But also, if you just want to send me an email and say, hey, here are my thoughts about the show, Ryan, I would love to know what you're thinking. There is a contact form on my website, ryanohara.org/betterpreach. A little contact form right there. Fill that thing out. Comes right to my inbox. Makes my day. You have millions of choices when you podcast. Thanks for pressing play today. See you next time.